can look you in the eyes. You're just like an angel, and your skin makes me cry. And you
Good evening, everybody, and welcome to From the Other Side, broadcasting live tonight from Minsk, Belarus. This is live show 152, Fault Line Reality. And here's what we're doing tonight. We're going to break through the performance. You've been told a story. The West is united. The EU is principled. Sanctions work. Ukraine is winning. And the dollar is unshakable. Globalization is stable. And anyone who questions any of that is a traitor or a bot. We're going to test all those claims. And you're going to hear just in a minute from George Galloway, one of the most banned but still standing political voices in Europe, instead of talking politics. And you can hear that him on his show, what he has to say about that. I'll ask him about his visit to Minsk, and you're not supposed to hear that conversation, but you're going to hear it here. Then we're going to widen out. We'll show you how this isn't just a war over land. It's a war over who controls money, energy, minerals, chips, shipping lanes, banking rules. And we'll explain why Europe is now literally confiscating other nations' sovereign wealth and calling it morality. We'll talk about why gold is exploding, why AI hype is now state policy, why supply chains are the new artillery, and how all of that fits into one hard truth. The old global order is cracking, and two rival systems are forming in real time. We'll bring it home with something real, something human. Dynamo Minsk on the ice. 2 more games under lights at Minsk Arena. Because while Brussels is writing press releases about rules-based order, people here in Minsk are living, building, playing, raising kids, showing up for their team. And then we're going to talk about the cocoon, the illusion that protects Western leadership from accountability. The story they feed you so you don't ask what is really done in your name. This is not a comfortable show. It's not meant to be. It's meant to be honest. Are you ready? Let's go. All right, we're opening tonight with something special. What you're about to see is a conversation we recorded right here in Minsk with George Galloway, host of the mother of all talk shows, one of the most watched political broadcasts on the planet. Now, love him or hate him, here's why this matters. You're not supposed to hear honest conversations like this anymore, unfiltered, unscripted, and far from the usual Western echo chamber. We caught up with George and talked about his visit to Minsk, his impressions of the city and its people, our trip to the Stalin Line, and of course the KHL hockey game at the Minsk Arena that we went to on Thursday night. It's a different side of Belarus, the side the outside world rarely sees. So in a moment we're going to play you that full conversation. No spin, no headlines, just real impressions from a man who's seen a lot of the world and finally came here to see this part of it for himself. Let's roll that interview. I'm honoured to have with me the legendary George Galloway, host of the mother of all talk shows, the biggest political podcast on the planet, airing on YouTube every Wednesday and Sunday at 7 p.m. London time. It is a show I watch every week without fail. A huge thank you to Mr. Galloway for joining me, and I appreciate you taking the time to come on my live show. George, you spent some time here in Minsk. What are your first impressions of the city? When you arrived, what struck you the most? As you walked around the city and met people, what sense have you gotten of everyday life here? And of course, many Westerners have never seen Belarus and have a very different picture in their minds. How does the real Minsk compare to the image often portrayed in the Western media?
Well, thank you for the opportunity, not just to appear on your show, but to thank you publicly for all the help that you gave your fellow British Aussie delegation that arrived here in Minsk some days ago and is now departing. It was thanks to you that we saw things and people in Minsk that we would not otherwise have seen. So many thanks. I'll be forever grateful to you. As to your question, Minsk is a wonderful place. It is a beautiful European city. It's incredibly clean. It's absolutely safe, even in the dead of night. We've walked around here 1, 2 o'clock in the morning and haven't felt in the least in peril from anyone. I never saw a beggar. I never saw a threatening individual, and I saw hardly any police. And there are not many European cities of which you could say that nowadays. The people are stoic, they are determined, they are patriotic, they know their history, they know who was with them and who was against them. And now that the European powers have inexplicably made an enemy of Belarus, well, they are looking farther and farther afield for new friends and customers and investors, and they are finding them. Not just the obvious in Russia, but also in China. China has a very, very big position here now in Belarus and donated a football stadium to the people of Minsk, donated many other cultural and sporting facilities. And it's good that Minsk now has new friends. Not that it doesn't want to remake relations with its old friends, but that's a matter for the old friends rather than for the people of Belarus. It is a wonderful city with great potential. If you were buying property anywhere in Europe, frankly, you'd buy it here. The value of the property here is a fantastic investment. If you're looking for a holiday for your family in a place that values the family and values traditional things in life, this is definitely where you would come. Restaurants are amazing. Lebanese restaurants, Chinese restaurants, Belarus restaurants, Russian restaurants, Georgian restaurants. It's a food fantasy capital, this, Minsk. So thanks to you, we saw all of that and much more.
We took a trip together out to the Stalin Line just outside Minsk, an incredible symbolic site for Belarus, which has equipment from the Great Patriotic War and the Cold War periods. What were your impressions when you saw the scale of the complex, the military equipment, and the attention to preserving its history? And do you think people in the West truly grasp what this country went through during the Great Patriotic War?
Well, they don't, of course. In fact, they are making every effort in Western countries not just to forget about World War II, but to distort and rewrite history so far as World War II is concerned. We're supposed to hate Russia and love Germany. We're supposed to hate China and love Japan. And in the period that I grew up in, these were, of course, entirely reversed. The Stalin line was one of the great experiences of my life, to be honest, and I have you to thank for it. We would never have made the journey but for you, and you were quite insistent that we would find it valuable, and boy, did we find it valuable. Not just the hands-on experience of reliving the horrors that took place here in the lifetime of people still alive today. I mean, the Second World War only ended 9 years before I was born. I grew up in the shadow of the Second World War, and 1 in 4 citizens in Belarus were killed in the Second World War. The damage to this country was phenomenal, incalculable, and yet the heroism and determination to liberate their whole land was a national mission, and one which was pursued with patriotic, even religious zeal. Every last occupier was extirpated from this country. It is a sacrifice almost impossible to imagine. I mean, 1 in 4 British people would today be 15 million people or more. It is a truly staggering scale of losses. But the heroism of the tank men, of the men in those pillboxes, the men in those foxholes, the men in those trenches, the heroism of the people that held up the Nazi advance on the Stalin line, including here in Belarus, must never be forgotten. If we forget to honor the people who made our own freedoms possible, then we are committing a very grave act. If not for the people here and the victorious Red Army in 1945, I'd be speaking to you in German, except, of course, I wouldn't be speaking to you. I would long ago, for one reason or another, have been destroyed.
Of course, on Thursday night, we went to the KHL hockey game for a home game between Dynamo Minsk and the Far Eastern Russian team Amur at the Minsk Arena. 15,000 people, sold out, electric atmosphere. This was your first ice hockey game, so what did you make of the game itself? The atmosphere, the passion of the fans, the presentation, the energy of the arena, and of course, are you now a Dynamo Minsk hockey fan?
I definitely am a fan of the famous Dynamo Minsk, and I'm now a fan of ice hockey. I had never before visited an ice hockey match, and I wouldn't have, except for you telling me how good it would be, and boy, did again you get that right. It was electric, as you say. The stadium is magnificent. The 15,000 fans sounded like 100,000 fans, and it was joy unconfined. We won 6 goals to 1, and I know that just a few days previously Dynamo had beaten Sochi by 8 goals to 2. So I'll be looking at the league table with a great deal more interest now than I would have before. Dynamo Minsk, great side, great colours, great stadium, great presentation. I really recommend not just ice hockey, but the famous Minsk Dynamo to everyone.
After nearly a week here, what will you take away from this visit to Belarus? Has it changed or challenged any of your early perceptions? And finally, if you were to describe Minsk in a few words for my viewers, what would they be?
No, the thank you all goes to you, I'm afraid. You did for us what nobody else did, and we'll never forget it. You ferried us around, you showed us the Stalin line, you showed us the Dynamo Minsk ice hockey team, and these are life-changing experiences. The city can be summed up as I tried to do at the beginning. A beautiful European city. And it's Europe's loss, not Belarus's loss. It's Europe's loss to cut this beautiful country off. And there will be other friends who will take your place. So you who are sanctioning Belarus are not succeeding, first of all. The people are overcoming the sanctions. Look at the quality of the motor cars going past me right now. That was a Range Rover. There are Chinese cars, there are European cars, even North American cars here. There's everything that the people need here. And they've got a government that looks after them. And I wish we had a government that looks after our people. The schools here, the health service here, the public realm, the roads, the open spaces, public spaces, are all treasures that have largely disappeared in Western Europe. If you could see Western Europe today, you'd realize just how blessed the people are in Belarus.
Again, thank you for your time. And if you ever come to Minsk again, please let me know, and I'll show you around some more sites of the city and the country itself. And of course, the studio is yours to use when you want. That was George Galloway right here in Minsk, sharing his impressions of the city, his visit to the Stalin line, and his very first ever KHL hockey game at the Minsk arena. And for all the noise and narratives out there, sometimes it just takes being here, seeing it, feeling it, to understand what this country is really about. And a big thanks again to George for doing this and taking his time to experience Belarus for himself. And we'll be right back. You're watching From the Other Side. And we're back. Now let's widen the lens, because all of this Gaza, Ukraine, Europe, sanctions, censorship, none of it is random. It's all the same machine. Let's break it open. The world looks chaotic right now. Sanctions everywhere, new trade blocks forming, currencies under pressure, wars that never end. We are told these are separate stories. They're not. It's one story, and the story is this. Politics and economics are not separate. Power and money are the same battlefield. The mistake the West wants you to make, especially the US and the EU, is to pretend the markets are neutral, that wars are defensive, and that the system is stable. None of that is true. Let's start with the myths. Myth 1. Every country is just acting in its national interest. That's the old so-called realist view. Sounds clever. In reality, it's camouflage. When Washington sends weapons, seizes reserves, or threatens sanctions, we're told it's America defending a democracy. No, it's America defending corporate and financial dominance. That's not the same as defending the average American. That's Lockheed, that's BlackRock, that's Exxon. Calling it national interest is just a rebrand. Myth 2. Free markets bring global peace. We've heard this for 30 years. Globalization lifts all boats. Did it? No. Globalization didn't erase the state. The state has always been in charge. The countries are actually developed. The US back in the day, Germany, Japan, China, they did it with protection, industrial planning, targeting finance, not with pure open markets. The fairy tale of free trade was mostly sold to weaker countries so they'd stay open and dependent. Myth 3. The world needs a benevolent hegemon to maintain order. We were told first it was Britain, then it was the US, Pax Americana. Here's the problem. If the US is really that stabilizing force, why is its influence collapsing in the whole regions? Why are countries openly walking away from it? Why is it relying on open military threats instead of attraction? Why is it sanctioning everyone who doesn't obey? That's not stability. That's panic. Now let's go to the dollar, because this is where the mask really slips. Britain ran an empire. Sterling had an empire under it. London was skimming the wealth of India and half the world and recycling that surplus back out as British investment, and that's what made the sterling credible. The US never fully had that. After World War II, Washington tried to make the dollar the world's money, and for a while that kind of worked. The US ran deficits, shipped dollars everywhere, acted like the banker of the planet. But that model contains its own poison. The world needs dollars, so the US prints dollars. The more it prints, the less each dollar is trusted. By the late 1960s, the US couldn't even keep the dollar honestly linked to the gold anymore. By 1971, that link was gone. So what replaced real banking? Finance. The US and the UK escalated financialization. Essentially, you don't need to buy American products, you just need to be inside our dollar system. Derivatives, swaps, Wall Street bubbles, City of London bubbles. That was the new export. And that worked for a while. But here's the trap. You're now living inside an economy that must keep inflating assets to look strong. Raising interest rates too far and you blow up the bubble. Lower them too far and you torch the dollar's credibility. That's exactly where the US is right now. Stuck. Out of tricks. So what do you do when the money machine starts to wobble? You lean on force. This is the part nobody in Western media wants to say out loud. The more fragile the economic core becomes, the more aggressive the foreign policy becomes. You paper over domestic weakness with external pressure. You turn markets into weapons. You turn alliances into obedience contracts. You call it values. And that brings us to right now. We're not in a globalized world. We're in a system where the US is trying to keep control of capital, resources, industry, and compliance. And other countries are openly refusing to keep playing that game. That refusal, that's what people call multipolarity. It's not polite, it's not academic, it's a material reality that Washington cannot simply give orders anymore without being answered back. Which leads us to the next chapter, how that fight is actually being waged day to day. In oil, in chips, in rare earths, in banks, in sanctions. That's our next segment. So let's talk about the real war, not the PR war, the economic war. Right now the United States is doing something it hasn't had to do since the end of the Second World War. It's trying to reorder the entire global economy by force. Not just military force, economic force, energy, currency, tech, logistics, even food. So step one, the energy sanctions. Washington targets Russia's biggest oil exporters. Sounds like punishment for Moscow, but that's not the real objective. The real target is everyone still buying Russian oil, especially China and India. Here's how that game works. You declare Russian supply dirty. You pressure everyone else not to touch it. You tighten global supply. The oil price jumps. Suddenly US oil and gas become indispensable to Europe, and American producers who are losing Chinese demand get rescued by higher prices and captive European buyers. That's not values, that's market capture. Step 2. Freeze the battlefield in Ukraine. Washington is quietly pushing for what you might call a freeze and lock outcome. Lock in the current battle lines, call it stability, and then move to the next phase. What's that next phase? Using Russian minerals, rare earths, strategic inputs to break dependence on Chinese processing. Because here's the nightmare scenario for Washington. China controls the middle of the supply chain, the magnets, alloys, refined elements that make missiles, drones, batteries, sensors, the stuff that turns raw material into usable weapon systems and advanced manufacturing. If China can throttle that, the US can't fight a long war at industrial scale. So the plan is peel Russia's resources away from China by ending the shooting and quietly doing extraction deals. That's what peace means when it comes from Washington right now. Resource alignment. China is not sitting still for that. China is already playing 3 major pressure cards. It cuts purchases off US energy and food, which hit American producers right where elections are won or lost. It's putting conditions on rare earth exports and even asserting a kind of veto down the chain. If our material is in the component, we get a say to where the component goes. It's slashing exposure to US origin energy so that the sanctions can't be used as a choke collar later. Meanwhile, Europe, our favourite moral lecture hall, is being economically skinned alive. Energy costs in Europe exploded when they cut themselves off the Russian supply while pretending that wouldn't matter. German industry is bleeding. Plants are shutting down or moving. And when Europe panics and begs for cheaper input, the answer from Washington is, fine, relocate your factories to American soil, bring your tech with you, and we'll call it friend-shoring. You pay for the move. And this is happening to Japan and South Korea too. The message is, we'll protect you, but you've got to de-industrialize at home and rebuild in the US. Now layer semiconductors, AI and banking on top. Europe started seizing Chinese semiconductor assets in Europe under the flag of security. China's response was basically, cool story, we'll stop supplying you the things you just tried to steal. The result? The exact chip shortages Europe claim it was trying to avoid. Auto plants cut production. Ministers fly to Beijing like travelling salesmen. Beijing smiles and shrugs. AI. The US is inflating AI and chips into a national survival bubble. All money must flow into this sector. The state is now openly steering capital. They used to mock China for state capitalism. Now they're doing it themselves, because if they don't, the financial bubble dies. And with that, the illusion of American technological inviolability. And then there's the gold. Gold is blasting past $4,000 US mark is not superstition. It's a signal. It's the world saying quietly, we don't trust that our dollars are safe, and we don't trust that you won't steal our reserves. Well, let's talk about the EU and theft dressed up as morality. That's next. But before we go directly to Brussels looting Russian assets, let's pause on what leverage actually looks like in 2025. We've hit a phase where supply chains are weapons, not tariffs, not slogans, physical choke points. Rare earths, graphite, gallium. These aren't exotic trivia. They're literally inside every modern weapons platform, drone, EV motor, guidance package, radar, battery, high-end chip. And you don't get modern warfare or modern industry without them. Here's why that matters. Mining is everywhere. Processing is not. You can dig out ore out of the ground in a dozen countries, but only a handful of places can refine that ore into weapons-grade material at industrial scale, cleanly, consistently, and cheaply. And right now, one side of this global confrontation built that processing base over decades, quietly, patiently, while the West outsourced and congratulated itself for being a services economy. The other side, the US and Europe, are suddenly waking up and going, we don't control the valves anymore. So what happened next? First, the West tried brute force, bans, block lists, export controls, seizures, forced sell-offs. You can't ship this chip, you can't sell that tool, you can't own that factory. That backfired. The countries being targeted adapted. They built redundancy. They hardened the weak links, and they started answering back in a very calibrated way. Okay, we're not going to shut you off completely. We're just going to squeeze you in exactly the places where you can't substitute. We're going to extend your timelines. We're going to raise your costs. We're going to force you to move production and spend billions you don't actually have. Europe gets hit the hardest by this because Europe is trying to act like an empire without having the industrial base of an empire. So Brussels will shout about weaponizing dependencies when others do it. And then in the next breath, Brussels will try to outright confiscate what doesn't belong to it, which brings us to the looting. Now let's talk about the European Union and what it's turned into. For years, the EU sold itself as a grown-up in the room. Rules, law, stability, human rights, sensible governance. The message was, we're not just like those dirty regimes, we're civilized alternative. Now look at what they're doing. Brussels has moved to unlock a roughly 140 billion euros from Russian frozen assets and handed that value to Ukraine. They're calling it compensation, reconstruction funding, even a loan. Let's be honest, that's not a loan, that's seizure dressed as virtue. How is Ukraine, a country whose economy has already been shattered, whose demographics are collapsing, whose budget is being kept alive by Western money, how is that country going to pay back 140 billion plus interest? It's not. Everyone knows it's not. The word loan is theatre, so it can pretend this is legal. And here's the dangerous part. This rips up one of the last remaining norms in international finance, the idea that sovereign reserves, state assets parked in your banking system, are protected. Because if you can just take another country's money, then because you don't like them, then why would any serious country ever keep their reserves in your system again? And this is not just about Russia. Saudi Arabia is watching. Beijing is watching. Delhi is watching. Investors are watching. The message they're all hearing is, your assets inside Europe are not actually yours. They are conditional. They exist at the pleasure of Brussels. That is fatal to trust, and without trust, Europe is done. The EU is already in industrial decline, energy poverty, and political denial. Now it's broadcasting. By the way, we'll expropriate you if you make us look morally superior on television. You can't come back from that easily. So Europe is sanctioning itself, deindustrializing itself, and now vandalizing its own financial credibility, all while calling this defending democracy. That's not leadership, that's collapse with branding. And yet, here in Belarus, here in Minsk, life goes on. People work, they build, they skate, they train, they fill the arena, and they scream for their hockey club. So let's breathe for a second and talk about something real. Let's talk about Dynamo Minsk. Now we've got 2 home games to talk about at the Minsk Arena, and yes, if you've never been, you should. It's loud, it's blue and white everywhere, and it's one of those places that reminds you that normal life, real life, still exists outside the Western fog. First, Sochi came on October 28th, thinking they might finally snap their losing streak, and Dynamo Minsk sent them home with an 8 in the bag. Then Amur showed up on October 30th, trying to get revenge after a 6-2 loss, and Minsk gave them another 6-2. 4 wins in a row, offensive firing, power playing, cooking, Fukul solid, young guys scoring, and Minsk Arena doing what Minsk Arena does. Let's go through it. So for the first game of the week, Sochi, this was over early. Dynamo came out flying, 2 goals in the first 5 minutes. Borovic started it himself, won the draw in our end, carried it to coast, beating the goalie 1-0. Then Sam Anas, who just can't stop scoring right now, made it 2-0, 7 games in a row with a goal. That forced Sochi to pull their starter and put in a 19-year-old kid. Sochi got one back and ended Fukul's shutout streak, but then came the turning point, 5-minute major on Sochi for checking into the head, and Minsk absolutely buried them. On that long power play, Dynamo just rolled 4 goals in about 10 minutes of hockey. Every line contributing, puck moving fast, bodies going to the net. By the 28th minute, it was 8-1. Sochi got a consolation late, 8-2 final. The message of that game, Minsk can punish undisciplined teams. Special teams are clicking. Young guys like Borikov and Lipsky are pushing. And the coach said it right after. That 5-minute major was the key, and the kids earned their ice time with work rate and speed. Let's watch those goals.
Правильно задание понимают. В итоге игроки Крикунова, вот они бросают, а эти броски вот они так, про формы ради.
Ну, мне так кажется, что не у всех есть такой исполнитель. Бориков забивает! Красивейший гол! Выиграл, да?
Уходит в лицевой борт. Классная передача от Милошис, неудобно. И наш гол! 2-0!
Я почему-то не сомневался, что он прямо сейчас забьет. Я вот как только он взял шаг...
Нет, так он даже в чужой, в принципе, так мог быть.
Ой-ой-ой, вот это да!
Справляется Энос. Ну, даже хорошо, что не трогал шайбу. Высокоподнятый. Сейчас продолжается владение. Уэлли!
Преимущество, и могут его еще увеличить. Ой-ой-ой, Липский забрасывает. Очень важный гол за Даниила. Наконец он забил. Хотя на секунду показалось, что сейчас спасет свою команду.
На это большинство на синюю линию Смит.
Да, чуть изменили сочетание, но, возможно, тоже такой тактический ход. Отрезка сам, еще один гол. И уже Бориков забрасывает. Ну, просто что говорят. Лайла посмотрим. Пускай Лайла отличится.
Не, я хочу конкретного защитника.
Дубль Липского.
Играют и забивают. Вадим Шипачев.
Next up, a more different opponent, same building, same result. Dinamo didn't even let them breathe in the first period, 19-5 in shots. That's total domination from a drop of the puck. Aggressive forecheck, quick transactions and another early lead to set the tone. Amur came in frustrated. They've just lost 6-2 to Sevastopol, so they tried to fire from every angle. But Zach Vukul was solid again, calm under pressure, letting Dinamo play their structured, patient game. And then came the night's headline, Vadim Moraz, another hat-trick, his second this month, and every goal coming at key moments to kill Amur's momentum. Now, a bit of a special note on this one. I had George Galloway, his wife, and a few of his colleagues with me at the game. They were in Minsk for the 3rd Eurasian Security Conference, and we all watched it together from the VIP box in Minsk Arena, as you can see from this video coming up. So here we are in the VIP, in the box. And let me tell you, they absolutely loved it. The energy, the crowd, the pace. They couldn't believe the atmosphere here. George even said afterward that hockey in Minsk feels like a national event. And he's right. And it really does. And now he's a fan. Back to the ice. Amur got one back on the power play. Made it to 3-1. But Minsk responded instantly. Controlled the second. Locked it down third. And finished 6-2. A complete performance. Sharp special teams. Disciplined defense. Confident goaltending, and a team that's just clicking right now. Let's watch those goals.
Бросает с дальней дистанции через рикошет мимо створа эта шайба свалилась. И продолжается атака Саакашвили.
Отметил трафик, да, Сергея Кузнецова, там, который защитником там боролся на пятаке и затруднял работу и обзор. Дорожка, еще один момент. О, 2-0! Ну, шикарно, шикарно, просто.
Используется все чаще и чаще во второй 20-минутке.
Сейчас момент. И гол! Отличное попадание в дальний угол. Егор Бориков забивает.
Атаки. А вот Мороз здорово стоит играть, бросает Мороз и забрасывает. Вот она, нужная шайба для Вадима Мороза. Наконец-то попадает Вадим. Много. Мостик. где дорожка. Поэтому, конечно, выключаться парням не стоит. Внутренняя конкуренция также должна присутствовать. Еще один момент. Играть Пичук по шайбе. Атака продолжается. Лайл забивает Лайл. Пичук там отдает.
Смит закатывается за ворота. Мороз будет отдавать назад, как это часто делает? Нет, Мороз катит по центру. Очень уверенно и забивает. Вадим Мороз сегодня тоже дубль.
So what does this week in Minsk tell us? Minsk Arena is a problem for visiting teams. You make a mistake here, take a 5-minute major, lose structure, get stuck in your zone, and Dynamo will put 4, 5, 8 past you. Depth is showing. It's not just a top line. Everyone is scoring. Goaltending is calm and consistent. And the standings reflect it. 4 straight wins, big goal differential climbing fast in the Western Conference. And the takeaway, this team has found its rhythm, fast starts, disciplined play, and a sense of confidence that you can feel in the building. That's the week in Minsk. 2 games, 14 goals, pure entertainment. The Bisons are in charge. See you on the next one. And here's why we keep doing this. While the EU lectures the world and burns its own future, while London detains journalists, while Washington tries to redraw the map of the global economy by threatening everyone, families here are going to the arena together. Kids here are chanting for their team. There is joy, normal civic life in a country the Western press keeps telling you it's supposed to be grey and miserable. You don't see that in Belarus, right? Yeah, you do every night. And that's what brings us to the last segment of the show. The psychology, the trance, the bubble people live in. Let's end it there. It's honestly heartbreaking to say this, but a lot of the West is now living inside a protective hallucination. Ukraine is a clear example. We are told Ukraine is winning. We are told Russia is collapsing. We are told just a little more funding and victory is certain. People are repeating that like scripture. Politicians repeat it. Media repeated it. Activists repeated it. Embassy accounts on social media repeated it. NATO officials repeated it. And if you've questioned it, if you ask basic questions about casualty numbers, territory lost, demographics, ammunition, logistics, corruption, you're called a traitor, a bot, a Russian asset. That's not policy, that's cult behavior. And it's the same pattern we saw with other social delusions. The same culture that will tell you biology is hate speech will also tell you Ukraine is on the brink of total victory any day now, as long as you sacrifice more lives. Reality becomes whatever the slogan needs it to be in this week. Ask yourself this: if the story were true, if Ukraine were really winning, why is the West now openly talking about freezing the conflict and redrawing borders? Why is Europe seizing Russian assets for reconstruction before the war is even over? Why is conscription in Ukraine scraping into older age brackets? Why are Western governments preparing their public for long struggle instead of a quick victory they promised 2 years ago? Because the truth is obvious. Ukraine is not winning. Ukraine has been fed into the grinder to serve someone else's agenda. And the people cheering the loudest are sitting in Paris, Berlin, London, Washington, nowhere near the front. And when you point this out, they panic. They don't argue facts. They go straight to rage. How dare you? Disinformation, Russian narrative. That fury is not confidence. That fury is fear. They are terrified of the moment the wider public realizes they were all lied to again. This is why the propaganda has to run non-stop. This is why dissent has to be hunted, shamed, censored. The cocoon has to be maintained, because the second the public wakes up and says, hold on, what exactly did we fund? What exactly did we cheer for? It's over. The credibility is gone. The trust is gone. The consent is gone. And I'll say this as clearly as possible. The Western ruling class cannot survive another mass shattering of trust. Not after Iraq, not after Libya, not after COVID, not after the energy crisis, not after the economic squeeze. If the public finally understands what was actually done in Ukraine, politically it's nuclear. So they build a cocoon. In that cocoon, Russia is always about to collapse. Sanctions always work. Every new weapons shipment is a game changer. Every Ukrainian setback is tactical. Every Russian advance is a desperate last gasp. NATO is noble, pure, defensive, selfless. And if you challenge any of that, you are not debating, you're committing heresy. So people pushing this are not all evil. Some are true believers. Some are just paid. Some are career bureaucrats who lost the ability to tell truth from talking points somewhere around 2014. Some are psychologically broken. Some are empty suits reading whatever the teleprompter says so they can keep their job. But this result is the same, a civilization that cannot admit reality, even as reality burns through the curtain. Here's the punchline. The cocoon will burst. It always bursts. It burst after Iraq. It burst after Afghanistan. It burst after the financial crash. It burst after COVID policy failures. And it's going to burst after Ukraine. When it does, the blame game will be vicious. We were misled. We were poorly briefed. Nobody could have known. You've heard that before. You'll hear it again. The people who drove this will pretend they were skeptics all along. And remember who said what and when. Because the truth is simple. This was never about defending freedom. It was about defending control, financial control, supply chain control, narrative control, in a world that's slipping out of the Western hands. And that brings us to close. That's the show. Here's where we are at the end of live show 152, Fault Line Reality. The economic order the West told you was eternal is splintering. Europe is not leading with values. It's liquidating its credibility to look tough. The US is not defending freedom. It's trying to hold on to the supply chains, banking power and resource access by forcing the rest of the world into compliance. The so-called rules-based order is now openly. We make the rules, we keep the assets, and you obey. And the mask is slipping. Countries are walking away. Parallel systems are forming. You can feel it, and because that reality, you can't admit it publicly, because the people in charge can't afford another Iraq-level moment of mass awakening. The propaganda has gone from persuasion to hysterical. That's the cocoon. Ukraine is winning. Sanctions are working. Everything is under control. It's not under control. It's breaking. But here's the good news. Once people see that, once they realize they've been managed, not informed, the spell goes. And when that spell goes, the consent goes. And when the consent goes, the machine stops pretending it's noble and you finally see it for what it is. That's why they hate shows like this. That's why certain people are getting detained in airports for asking the wrong questions, like George Galloway. Watch his show, the mother of all talk shows, Wednesdays and Sundays at 7 p.m. London time. That's why platforms throttle reach. That's why entire narratives get memory hold overnight. We're going to keep doing it anyway. Thank you for watching From the Other Side, live show 152, Fault Line Reality. If you're new here, like it, share it, subscribe, send it to someone who still believes BBC headlines are gospel. Leave the comment. Tell us where you're watching from. Tell us what you're seeing where you live. To everyone who's been with us every week, respect. Good night from Minsk. Stay sharp. Stay human. We're out.